So reincarnation studies can be approached in two different ways. One is as a religious belief or as a philosophical idea, or it can be approached as a science. And Darren mentioned Ian Stevenson. This is his picture here. If as a science, what we're interested in is not beliefs so much as cases, right? As empirical evidence for reincarnation, to try to evaluate that evidence and see whether it justifies the belief or not, and if so, what it tells us. Well, I should say, Stevenson died in 2007. He started he first went into the field studying these cases in 1961. He died in 2007, and at that point, he had over 2,500 cases in his files, records of them. 1,700 of those cases had been what we call solved, that is verified. The previous person whose life was recalled had been identified. And this Rylan O'Banion here is a girl whose case I studied, and it's I discuss it in my book, Science of Reincarnation. And I'll use that as sort of a touchstone for some of the things I'm going to be talking about today. This picture was taken when she was 27 months old. And you can see from the expression on her face, something seems to be wrong. They didn't know until later what it was. This, it turns out, was her first past life memory. She is looking at something which made her remember having died in a plane crash, or rather when a plane crashed and hit her house. This was later on, when she started talking enough about this, they were able to put the clues together. And it was a Pan Am flight that took off from the New Orleans airport, hit a low altitude wind shear, crashed into a residential neighborhood less than a mile from the end of the runway, and killing everybody on the plane, of course, and 6 people on the ground, including the person, Jennifer Schultz, that Rylan recalled having been. So anyway, so these past life memories are one of the major classes of the signs of reincarnation that we find in these cases. Another is behaviors. And with Rylan, the behaviors are particularly interesting because they began before she started talking about her memories. In fact, before this picture was taken, right? Before she even had imaged memories at all. And they were sort of a post-traumatic nature, which is typical in cases where there was a violent death. And, you know, she died in a very bizarre way with a plane crashing into her house. She would awake during the night, sleepwalk. And this would go on night after night after night for years. And she had other post-traumatic type things going on too. She also exhibited other kinds of behaviors that we see in these cases, just behavior patterns, habits, and things like that. Physical signs. This is the third major class of the signs that we see regularly in these cases. If you look, you can see Rylan's hair is just slightly reddish. And that's kind of interesting because Jennifer Schultz, the girl who she was crawling had been, was a redhead. So and that wore off, but still her hair was more reddish when she was born and at this age than her sisters or her mother, anybody else in her family was. So it's kind of interesting, but not hugely significant, I think, in this case. Anyway, now to go on to expand a little bit more about our research findings. With these 1,700 plus cases now, because some of us have continued since Stevenson's death to investigate them, we find some features that are universal or near universal, coming in all cases. Then we find some culture linked features And then I want to talk a little bit about Asian versus Western case patterns, which is something that is beginning to emerge in recent years as we get more Western cases. Stevenson was mainly interested in the Asian cases, or he worked mainly in Asia. I think he would have been interested in Western had he found them, but he worked mainly in Asia. So for things on the side of the case subject, well, I've mentioned some of them. The signs, those are major things on the side of the case person. There are also things on the side of the previous person, though, which is kind of interesting. One of them is violent death, and here again we come back to Ryland because she died violently, or remembered having died violently. We find violent deaths in about 50%. So. Not all cases by any means, but 50% of those solved cases. But still, that's a much higher percentage of cases than we would find with violent deaths in the normal population. So there is something significance there. Culture-linked features, relationship status. By that, I mean the relationship between the previous person and the case subject. And that can be a stranger, like it was with Ryland. It can be a family member, or it can be an acquaintance. And it varies by culture, the incidence of these. In most cultures, the family cases are in the minority, in most Asian cases. In tribal cases, and there are a number of indigenous peoples around the world with reincarnation beliefs, and we look at the tribal cases, where they have clans, like among the Tlingit. Stevenson did a lot of work among the Tlingit. The cases fall within the clan, within the family. Almost 100% of cases in tribal societies have family relationships, which is something we don't see, in Asia, in a mission length. That is the length of time from death to birth. That's how we calculate the intermission, from death to birth. And that also varies cross-culturally and has some relationship to cultures, to particular cultures, and to beliefs within those cultures. For instance, in Buddhist cultures, Buddhism holds that reincarnation occurs at conception. In the cases from Buddhist cultures, we don't find cases with intermissions of under 9 months. They're just, they're very rare. I mean, let's put it that way. They're extremely rare. On the other hand, you have the Druze, who are a Shia Islamic sect in Lebanon, Israel, also Syria, that area there, who believe that the soul is transferred immediately upon death into the body of a child being born. So there's really no intermission as they imagine it. Quite different idea. And in Druze cases, well, we don't have any cases with intermissions of no time, but there are cases of intermissions of under 9 months. The median is 8 months. So there's a significant number of cases, Druze cases where the reincarnation occurred during the gestation period. Okay, sex change. Here again, we find a relationship between the cases and the beliefs. The Druze are people who do not believe that it's possible to change sex between lives, and we don't have Druze sex change cases. Whereas in places that do believe that you can change sex, we do find those cases. Okay, I have to rush on here because I only have 15 minutes. Asian versus Western case patterns. I want to talk a little bit about that because I think it's very interesting. Relationship status. We find relatively few stranger cases that are solved in the West. We find relatively more family cases with family relationships in the West than in Asia. And that's even considering that it's much easier to solve, right, a family case than it is a stranger case. Just family cases are reported much less often in Asia than they are in the West. Intermission length, and this also is very interesting. Globally, in Stevenson's 1,700 plus verified solved cases, which are the only ones we can really know about what the intermission length is, it's 15 months. That's all, 15 months. With Rylan, it was 28 years, and that is the median for Western cases. Okay, Western stranger cases. Western family cases is slightly shorter, but still significantly longer than we find in Asia. We don't really know why that is. We have ideas. Maybe it could be because in the West, we have this idea that, we're going to meet loved ones when they die, and so forth. And so maybe people hang around longer before they reincarnate. We don't really know, but that's an idea. And then intermission experience. This again is an interesting thing. It turns out intermission experience is what it sounds like. That is the memories of the intermission between lives, between death and birth. About 20% of cases, the children talk about this period. In a lot of their memories, you really can't verify, but some things you can, because they apparently they see through ESP, through clairvoyance. And so they see things that are going on in the material world, in the families that they left. They talk about them, and those things can be verified. Now, when we come to Asian versus Western, the thing is that with the Western cases, the kids talk about having gone to heaven. I mean, that's what we imagine in the West, right? We go to heaven after death. That's what they say. In Asia, they don't have the concept of heaven. So what the children who talk about the intermission say is that they existed during the intermission in a realistic terrestrial setting, like they hung out in a tree in a conch shell, something like that. And from that vantage point, they saw different things were going on, right? That can be looked at and verified. So how I think reincarnation works, I want to move now to this, because if we're going to make reincarnation studies into a science, we need to move beyond simply case studies and looking at patterns. We need to move on to theory, development of theory. We need to develop ideas that we can actually test, put to the test. And so let me run through my ideas here. I puzzled for a while about what it is survives death. People say it's the soul, right? Well, the soul is basically a religious concept, and there really isn't a good definition of what soul is. Until I realized, we can say that what survives death is simply consciousness, right? The body dies, the body fails, but our consciousness continues. Our consciousness continues through death, through the intermission, until it comes in association with another body. And and at that point, we can say that the consciousness possesses the body. Now, possession, is sometimes talked about, mediumistic possession, demonic possession, as a replacement of consciousness, right? But I think we can also think of possession as just the possession of a body, right? And at that point, we can see reincarnation as a type of possession, right? But not a temporary possession, not a possession where the consciousness is replaced, a consciousness, a possession that's more permanent, that's more long-term. So that's how I see reincarnation. Now, the next one, psychogenic factors in the production of behavioral and physical signs. Psychogenic factors. The mind, right? The mind is producing behavioral and physical signs. Again, through the ESP, in this case, through psychokinesis, right? The incoming mind is impacting its body to produce the behavioral and physical things. Cultural influence is on discarnate agency, discarnate period, the period between when they're out of body during the intermission period. So as I said, I think consciousness is what survives, and the consciousness stream is continuous with embodied life, right? So wouldn't it be entirely natural then for us to carry into death the ideas that we had in life, our convictions, our beliefs, right? And those are shaped by our cultures, right? So that's maybe how we get to things like, if you believe that you have to have 9 months, that reincarnation has to be before conception or at conception, then that's when you're going to reincarnate, right? That's when you're going to join the body. So um, therefore, um, that's when reincarnation occurs. Um, Whereas if you believe otherwise, then you'll come in faster. Um, so the beliefs, I think, are internal. Then that's how I explain these cultural um, things. And this is my last point here, coming back to science versus religion, because they're both valid approaches, right? They're both valid approaches for reincarnation studies. Just depends on what you want to get at. If you want to study beliefs, if you want to study culture, if you want to study how reincarnation works in that culture, yeah, study it from a religious point of view, study it, from a philosophical point of view, maybe, if you want to understand, ideas in an abstract way. If, on the other hand, you want to try to ask, is there something to this? Then you need to turn to the cases, you need to turn to the data, you need to turn to the science. And that's what I like to do. So that's, I didn't check my watch to see when I started. I may have run over a little bit. This is my final slide, and if it'll work for me to leave it up, I'll leave it up, because it gives resources that you can follow up, my books, and a couple of pages here they might want to look at. And so I can turn it over. I turn it back to Darren, and however he wants to manage the questions. I told him when I came in, yeah. I'm sorry. There's a lag here, and I caught up in that. So.
Hello. I'm not going to say your name because I'm not done yet, but I was going to say hello and then your name. Okay. So, this stuff is fascinating to me, and thank you for doing this research. It's incredible. My question is about, I understand that you're speaking about a lot of different subjects here. My main question is about the fact that, does reincarnation have to be in succession? And can't we not be in more than one body or existence at a time? And isn't time just a human construct? And how does that relate to your research? And because you did talk about different cultures having different experiences in their research, and societies that believe in certain things have research that supports that. I don't hear anybody talking about that we can be in two places at one time, and that 28 years for Rylan, maybe there were other lives in there, or maybe there's future lives that we don't even have access to, because in our culture, we have no concept of that sort of thing. How do you think that applies, Jim?
Well, from all we see in the cases follow in a linear fashion. That time seems to follow in a linear fashion. We don't see people jumping around in time in their memories. And because we don't have many life series, but we have a few where we have 3 verified lives. But we have a lot where we have 2, right? The past life and the present life. What we see in the present life is very much continuous with the past life. So we don't see we don't see this type of jumping around. The other thing I like to say in response to this question is, everything we know from cosmology, everything we know from geology, everything we know from biology is that time proceeds in a linear fashion. So I don't see any reason to think that reincarnation is going to be any different. And these ideas that are floated around by some theoretical physicists of parallel time, parallel universes, and all of this stuff, it's very controversial. It was introduced really by people who did not want to accept the idea that consciousness might get involved with quantum interactions, and, to be technical about it, collapse the wave function, right? To bring about closure in, because the quantum realm we now know is basically a statistical realm, and until things, we don't know how anything is going to end up being until it ends up being it, right? And so early on in quantum theory, there were people who were suggesting that that you had to bring in consciousness to do that, to close things, to bring closure to it. But there are physicists who don't like that. You know, the materialists just don't want to deal with that. So it's the materialist type people who went off and invented all these other ways to get around the idea that consciousness has anything to do with quantum reality. And you know, and so I just I don't like I don't like the physics that I've read from those people, and I tend to align myself with the physicists who reject it all. So that's sort of my response to that.
Okay, well,
Jenny?
I respond. I know there's not a lot of time, but so what my question, I guess, or the counterpoint to that would be, well, yeah, of course we only experience what we would believe could be possible. So I guess my question is, then you're saying that you don't think anything outside of the linear realm is possible.
Give it in the chat. Anybody were able to copy it?
Jim.
Well, I don't know that it's right. I don't know that it's fair to say that we only experience things that we believe are possible. I mean, I think, I think all the time that that we're faced with things we didn't believe would happen. But I'm sorry, my mind strayed there a little bit. What was the, Tammy?
I was just wondering if you thought it was possible that it might not be linear. That's all.
Yeah, I just, everything I see in the cases suggests to me that it's linear.
Okay.
When we do have life series, we see them following one after another. We don't see them. I mean, people do have memories of multiple lives, but they imagine them in sequence, right? And we see the influence of the penultimate life on the previous life, in the influence of the previous life on the present life. We don't see the present life influencing the penultimate life, for instance. I mean, we just don't, And so everything to me suggests that it proceeds in a linear way.
Okay, thank you.
Got to keep darting through them. So we did have Essa. You had your hand up. I don't know if you'd like to ask directly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Jim, you can hear me? Uh-oh.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Thank you.
I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Let me see if I can get video. It may degrade the sound, but sound is still okay.
Okay.
Good. Well, now that we've talked about time, it changes a little flavor of the question, which is the question, Jim, is around walk-in souls, guest souls, and if that has been factored into any of your research. I also want to share my gratitude to you for researching. But about time, my only experience around the non-linearity, you mentioned we haven't seen a now life affect a past life. Is in a case of a guest soul or a walk-in soul having made themselves known to the vessel, to the present life, and that changing the walk-in soul's trajectory, right? Of how their life ended early, and then they got to come back and sort of live a more fulfilling life by occupying the vessel. But it didn't change the fact that they left early. So I concur with what you offered. Please go ahead. Thank you, Jim.
Okay. Yeah, I don't really care for the term walk-in. There is a phenomenon like this I'll get to and talk about. But the term walk-in was introduced by Ruth Montgomery back in the 1970s as part of the New Age culture, which is, and it's still a New Age sort of term. And what it meant for her was an advanced entity that took possession of, walked into someone's body, right? And the person, with the permission of to walk out, that was her term, the person walked out, and then the entity came in and took possession of it. And this was a way to advance human society into the New Age. All right. And so I avoid using that term. because I don't want all those connotations to it. What we do see, though, is what my term for it is replacement reincarnation. And Stevenson called it by different terms. There's actually a Hindi term, Parakaya Pravesh, Sanskrit Hindi term for this. So it's been known for a while. But it's a little bit different from what is usually described as walk-ins. What happens in a case of replacement reincarnation is that a person gets sick, you typically get sick and seems to die, but then revives with a totally different personality, different memory stream, claiming to be a different person entirely. So this is different from Ruth Montgomery's walk-ins, in that you get a complete change of personality. So it's a type of reincarnation, according to my definition, because it's a replacement reincarnation, because it is a possession. Yes, it's a type of possession. And this is one of the terms that Stevenson had for it, possession. It is a possession, but it's a permanent possession. It lasts to the end of the person's life. And we don't have follow-up studies of a great number of reincarnation cases, but we do have follow-up studies of a couple of these replacement reincarnation cases. And in fact, the replacement lasted until the person's natural death. So it is permanent once it occurs. So yeah, we do see that. But again, it's not, like you acknowledged, it's not jumping around in time. It's still linear. It's just that the possession, is a break. And another thing is, most of the cases like this, this occurs very early in life, in just the first couple of years. But there are documented cases of it occurring in the teenage years, and one from Tibet, as late as I believe it's Tibet, somewhere over there. Maybe it was China, actually. 32 is the oldest recorded one. But we get these cases from all over the world. I mean, in Europe too. I mean, so replacement reincarnation is what I call it. And in fact, I have a Science Encyclopedia article on that. So if you're interested in that, you can look up replacement reincarnation, Science Encyclopedia, or just replacement reincarnation. Maybe you can find it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, that's it. Yes. Okay.
Well, I will share that my personal experience is I became aware at age 6 of the invitation, and at 17, the formal kind of presence of the walk-in, which was a guest soul in my case, became known and stayed for 23 years and then left. So it wasn't quite beginning of life, and it didn't stay until the end of my natural life, but it was a chunk of time in between. And I think I might want to write you, kind of offline to your email, and maybe share some of what my experience is. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Essa. We're going to have to...
Yeah, I'd be interested in hearing about it. It doesn't really sound like a type of reincarnation, though, and I'm not sure that that walk-in. I mean, I think parapsychologically we would probably call that maybe an obsession. I mean, if you had, rather than a possession, because if you kept your own awareness the whole time, and your awareness wasn't displaced, it wouldn't really be a full possession. But we have the term obsession for something short of that, where you feel the influence, right, of another spirit on you. And so that's what it's. But I'd like to hear the details of it. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thanks, Jim. We're going to have to move on to the next question now, because we've only got 4 minutes until Dr. Gregory Shushan's presentation is due to start. So if you could answer these as quickly as you can. If we don't make them through all of them, there is a break session or a break in the session after Gregory Shushan's presentation. So maybe if Jim stays for that, we could then ask the rest of the questions there. Right. So Dan, I don't know. Okay. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask Jim yourself, Dan, or would you like me to ask the question you wrote down? Okay. So no response. So I'll assume you want me to read it for you. So Dan asks, how do you deal with skeptics of the more cynical kind, Jim?
How do I deal with skeptics of the more cynical kind? It's very difficult to deal with them because nothing you say gets through to them. I mean, they have very fixed ideas. Those skeptics are committed to materialism. And if they're committed to materialism and don't have any sort of open mind, they shouldn't be calling themselves skeptics, right? I mean, a skeptical person, it should be open-minded, but they're not. And so it's really, I think it's important to counter some of the things that they say, but I don't see much value in dialoguing with them because you just don't get anywhere. I mean, they have their fixed ideas and you're just not going to be able to convince them, and they're not going to be able to convince you because we each know the other's point of view, and we start in a different place. For those of us who are not materialists, then we can be, and for skeptics who are not fully materialists, for the less doctrinaire ones, who are simply skeptical, because they don't know the data. Yeah, I mean, you can talk to them about the data and educate them and change their minds. But with the extreme ones, you just can't.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, Dan. I think we've got time
Tim,
for...
was it Ben?
Sorry? Dan, yeah. Okay, so I always got to give us just a bit extra time just in case Jim's delay stops us. So I think we've got time for one last question, and then we've got 2 minutes before Gregory Shushan's presentation. This is from Titus. I'd just like to introduce Titus Rivas. Is the author, one of the authors of the book The Self Does Not Die. So thanks for coming, Titus. And we also have Jan Holden in the group as well, Dr. Jan Holden from last week's forum. So Titus asks, Jim, excellent talk. I wonder if you have ever heard of CORTs in the subcultures with Amida or Amitabha Buddhism. I've butchered that. I ask this because this type of Buddhism actually does believe in a pure land or heaven. I don't know whether they also believe rebirth, by the way. Jim.
Yeah, they probably do. I mean, I think it's a branch of the Mahayana Buddhism, right? And the Mahayana Buddhism it is distinct from the Theravada. It did believe in the pure land, and you find that in China and variations of it in Japan. I'm not sure exactly where that sect is. Titus. I usually think of your name. You can tell me how to pronounce it. I'm not sure. But so I'm not sure where exactly they're found. My guess would probably be China.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Jim. So there were 2 last questions from Pascal and Lisa, but we might have to skip on those for now. As I say, when we have the break session, we can, maybe if Jim's still here, we can ask during that time. So it's now dead on 8:35. So Dr. Gregory Shushan, sorry, Jim, if you could unshare your screen for us so that we can get Dr. Shushan up.
Yeah, I'm just pointing right there.
Brilliant, yeah. Thanks. I've just got to find Dr. Shushan's profile on here. He's right at the bottom. That's typical. No, he's not. Where are you, Doctor? Just a second. He's there, but I can't see him on the actual. Tammy, Ellie, Phil, Cedar.
Am I visible?
Gregory,
Am
there
I
you
audible?
are. There you
Okay.
are. Let me put you up on Spotlight. And just got to unshare Jim's screen. There we go. Okay, so Dr. Gregory Shushan, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your research, and the 15 minutes is all yours.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Darren, and thanks for inviting me. I'm Dr. Gregory Shushan, and my area of research is near-death experiences cross-culturally. I'm a historian of religions, so which means I'm not a priest. It's a secular study of religions. I don't have any sort of philosophical or religious commitments. So I'm kind of, I try to be as objective as possible in looking at the data cross-culturally, as well as the way I look at NDEs. My main focus is NDEs across cultures. My first book was called Conceptions of the Afterlife in Early Civilizations. And that was mostly focused on similarities across cultures. And what I did was look at 5 different areas of the world. Ancient Egypt, and by the way, my initial background was Egyptology, so that's kind of the area of the academic world that I'm coming from, rather than sociological or a scientific sort of background. So I looked at 5 different cultures: Egyptian, Mesopotamian, especially Sumerian, ancient China, Aztec and Mayan, and Vedic India. And so my question here was, if these afterlife beliefs are similar across all these cultures, how can we explain that similarity? And my sort of background thinking was, can near-death experiences explain the similarities? And what got me started on this path was, I was reading the ancient Egyptian Book of the Dead when I was studying Egyptian archaeology, and I started noticing that there were a lot of similarities with near-death experiences. So there's, just on a very vague, sort of, not vague, but very, very general structural sort of level. I'm not talking like, very specific things that match up to NDEs, but things like entering darkness, emerging into light, leaving the body, meeting deceased relatives, some sort of evaluation of a person's life. These sorts of things that you hear very commonly in near-death experiences. And this brought up in my mind a book by Carol Zaleski, which a lot of people might know about, Otherworld Journeys. And that's specifically concerned with near-death experience type narratives in medieval Europe. And Zaleski did a comparison of these medieval accounts, which were mostly by monks, very obviously culturally situated. They're very much about, promoting Christianity of the time. And a monk typically dies, comes back to life, and tells of all the glories of heaven and the evils of hell that they experienced. And it has a very didactic function. It's intended to teach people, to behave so you could go to heaven, and to watch your negative behavior or to go to hell. But Zaleski interpreted this not as, these are similar to NDEs because these monks were having these experiences, and these experiences have been happening throughout time and history. She saw them more as like, this is evidence that it's all in the imagination. It's the religious imagination, as she called it. So I came to a very different conclusion. I followed what David Hufford called the experiential source hypothesis, which is, very simply that afterlife beliefs or any kind of religious beliefs is grounded in some kind of primary experience. So basically, the NDE is responsible for the origins of a lot of afterlife beliefs across cultures. So this is, very like rushing through very quickly a lot of many years of research. So then I wanted to test this problem even further. So in the first book, I found that, there were enough similarities across cultures to say, yes, it does seem that near-death experiences are a factor in the afterlife beliefs of pretty much all of these cultures. And that's despite the many, many differences between them, which, I'm not glossing over, but just the idea that, the things I mentioned, entering darkness, the light, the beings of light, some kind of evaluation, these are all practically universal things in the afterlife beliefs that I was looking at. So I then proceeded to do a second study looking at small scale, mostly indigenous societies in Africa, Native American cultures, and Pacific cultures. The interesting thing here was when I started the first research, I was thinking, you read a lot about certain cultures not having afterlife beliefs. So for example, Sumerians, you read a lot in the literature, they didn't have real afterlife beliefs. They just believed in a very hazy Hades type world where it's just this shadowy existence and it's barely even an afterlife at all. But when I looked deeply into this stuff and went back to the primary sources, I found all kinds of afterlife beliefs that the Sumerians had in their mythology and different kinds of texts. So, being a kind of iconoclastic type of attitude that I have, personality, I thought, okay, I'm probably going to find the same things in the small scale societies because With African afterlife beliefs, you read in a lot of the older literature that they didn't really have beliefs in an otherworldly afterlife, or in a kind of afterlife where there's a negative and positive binary situation based on earthly behavior. So I sort of expected to find them, even though other scholars had said they're not there. So, but I didn't. So that was the interesting thing about this study. Native American examples were very much a model of the experiential source hypothesis, really, that many accounts, something like 30 overt statements in Native American accounts from 16th century onwards, that they were asked about their afterlife beliefs, and they said, our afterlife beliefs came from this particular person who died, went to the other world, and came back, and this is what he told us. And again, very obviously cultural distinctive things about each one of them, but the person left his body, he traveled through darkness, he went emerged into light, met some kind of spiritual being, often emanating light. So again, the very structural, general kind of similarities are still there. There were also those cases in the Pacific, especially in Polynesia. But in other areas of the Pacific and in Africa, it was very different. I didn't find any really kind of overt near-death experiences in Australian cultures or in Micronesian cultures. I found a lot in Melanesia and Polynesia, again, reflecting that experiential source hypothesis, where they very clearly say, somebody went to the other world, and this is what the information they came back with, and that's how we know what the afterlife is like. So what was interesting about this is, what's universal and what is cultural. And that has a major bearing on near-death experience studies in general. Because anything we say about NDEs, if we say that it's universal, it obviously has to actually be universal and apply to people in all these different cultures. So if it doesn't apply to, I'm not overgeneralizing. There are some African examples and other examples where they do fit that model of the experiential source hypothesis, but overall there's many that don't. So we need to then find a way to explain why, and in some ways explaining why some cultures did not valorize near-death experiences is just as interesting as why so many other cultures do. So for example, a lot of African cultures had a belief in possession. So if somebody came back to life, that person wasn't really greeted with open arms and saying, oh, my beloved husband, my beloved wife, whoever has come back, let's celebrate. It was more like, uh-oh, this person might be possessed by demons, get the rocks ready to defend ourselves. So there was no kind of cultural context for NDEs to become integrated in the belief system in the way that a lot of other cultures did, meaning they didn't really have these ideas that you're going to die and go to the other world and meet deceased relatives and have these wonderful spiritual experiences. It was more like, the important thing is, how is this going to affect us now? How is this possessed person or whatever victim of sorcery going to affect me? Are they going to attack me, or what's going to happen? So I'll try to speed it up a little bit, but feel free to interrupt me, Darren, if I'm going over time. I just want to quickly say that the reason this is important, I mean, obviously, to me anyway, it's important just on the innately important and interesting because of what human beings believe throughout history and how they relate to each other. I think if it were any other subject that wasn't dealing with such an important thing like what happens when we die, it would be a lot more interesting overall. Like, just if you came up with the idea, like, claims that somebody's discovered where beliefs in the afterlife came from, and it's a near-death experience, that's already pretty remarkable. But people want to enlist this kind of data as either further proof that there is an afterlife and that NDEs prove the afterlife, or as proof that it's all in the brain and NDEs are just the dying brain, and that's why there's this universal kind of reaction to it. So the similarities and the differences need to be reconciled and need to both be taken into account when building any kind of theory about NDEs. And that's something that was kind of lacking in the early days of near-death research. And there was even some debate about whether near-death experiences happened at all in other cultures, or if it was just a Western phenomenon. And that's been proven now, to my way of thinking, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it is a pan-human cross-cultural experience that's been happening since the beginning of time. I've found an ancient Egyptian example, which was kind of thought not to exist, and that's a pretty interesting one. So the other way that it's important to parapsychology and the ontological aspects of an afterlife, meaning just is there really an afterlife? Are near-death experiences a genuine experience of that afterlife? Is what kind of afterlife could possibly be feasible or conceivable given all of these cross-cultural dissimilarities? So if you have people in different cultures reporting different kinds of afterlife experiences in their near-death experiences, how can we say there is an afterlife? Thinking back to something that Jim said in his talk, that people, if they believe in a certain element of aspect or conception of reincarnation, then their experience might reflect that belief. And I think there's probably an element of that in near-death experiences, that if you believe that you're going to, meet Jesus, or you're going to believe you're going to meet the Buddha or whoever, that's very likely the kind of figure that you're going to see in the other world. If you don't have that expectation, you might just report a being of light, or however else you want to describe it. So my point really is that the similarities and differences have profound implications for near-death studies, including the metaphysical, survival after death interpretations. And it's important, though, to add that those similarities and differences can be, the data can be massaged either way to support a, survival hypothesis, or a, all in the brain, dying brain hypothesis. So I think that's probably hit my time. Yeah. Sorry, it's a bit of a whirlwind tour, but.
Okay, thank you, Doctor. Very, very interesting presentation. So we do have one question for now from Dan T. So Dan, if you'd like to unmute yourself and ask Dr. Shushan your question.
Hello. Yeah, I was just wondering, in terms of you kind of touched on this briefly, but when it comes to your own personal perspective on near-death experiences, I've heard that you're kind of neutral to the whole thing, so I'm assuming that you still remain kind of neutral on whether or not they are, as you say, the dying brain hypothesis or the surviving hypothesis.
Yeah, that's always the question that gets asked. I don't mind it. I would say I stay professionally neutral. In my writings and my research, I always try to look at both sides of the argument, and I actually don't go really into the evidence for or against near-death experiences being, proof of the afterlife. I've kind of deliberately shied away from that question, partly because other more qualified people have done it so much better than I could. But what I have done is said, given this evidence that we do have, and given the cross-cultural similarities and differences, in what way can it be used to support or, either kind of hypothesis? My personal belief is I do come down more in the camp of the survivalist after death interpretation. I think that's partly because there has just been no materialist theory that has adequately explained NDEs and all of their similarities and differences, not to mention all the veridical observations that people have reported during NDEs, the so-called anecdotal stuff, which when you combine it all is pretty compelling. So, I guess the short answer is don't look for me to say that in my next book or article, but it's the way I kind of lean. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's most of the Egyptian stuff is from the pyramid text, coffin text, Book of the Dead. They're like canonical religious Egyptian texts, which are there's a lot of detail about what it's like to die and what you're going to encounter in the other world. And the books are intended really to guide you through the kinds of perils that you're going to experience. And the way I looked at them, I should also say there was no context in ancient Egypt for reporting a personal experience. That was just not what writing was used for. It was documentary and it was religious. Documentary meaning, actual documents about, legal things and lists and king's decrees and things like that. But there was no today I woke up and left my body, whatever. So for my first research, I interpreted those ancient texts in light of near-death experiences and matched up, the kind of sub-experiences that people report in Nindi with the Egyptian accounts. And so that's why I came to that conclusion that there seems to be that kind of influence. But as far as an actual near-death experience, there's a couple of myths. Well, they're not actual myths because they're not canonical religious things, they're tales, they're stories. But because there's a gray area in these ancient texts about what was considered fact, what was entertainment, what was religious, there's one in particular that I kind of tend to think may have been based on an actual ND. It has a lot of, very obviously cultural features to it. And it's not entirely clear if they're saying the person went there in the body, going through a tunnel or not. But because it's such an ancient example that I kind of tend to consider it. There's another one, the story of Setni Kamwas, which very clearly is a mythological tale where they actually walk to the underworld, and there's a lesson at the end about kingship and religion and all these things. But the other one, the actual name of it is the person is escaping me, and it's never been translated into English. It's only in German. But that one is it just has more of a feel of having been grounded in the near-death experience, and they go to the other world and they meet judgmental type characters, and they go through different experiences and sub-experiences, and they come back and they're transformed in a positive way. So that's basically it.
Just to say, if you do have the hand raise feature enabled, your question will be prioritized for those that actually want to ask directly. So if you would like to be sure that your question's asked, then please do use that feature. So Ellie.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your sharing with us. So I'll try to formulate this question. It's still kind of broad in my mind, but I'm wondering a little bit about sort of confirmation bias, depending on the angle at which non-researchers consume their near-death experience information. Mm-hmm. And absolutely, I'm sure you would appreciate as a researcher, it cannot be overestimated how much people's sort of conceptual frameworks color their experiences, because any of this otherworldly experience has to come back down through the filter of the known mind and language. So absolutely. I'm very curious about the very different nature of some of the Christian near-death experience reports, which I for the most part avoid, and they're so different from what you see like on IANS and some of the other mm-hmm. places where overwhelming, there may be places of, people encounter places of some confusion, where souls are maybe like a little unsure, whatever, sort of a hazy area, mm-hmm. but you don't get this sort of hellish these hellish realms. It tends to be love and light and insight, whereas with some of these Christian ones, it sounds like something straight out of the Bible. And I wonder if you could just comment on that, because I've always found that disturbing, and wondering if I'm not just kind of really cherry picking my experiences to keep it all sweet.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are some examples of distressing NDEs in some of the non-Christian texts, especially Chinese ones. There's a couple of Native American ones. There's some African ones. So, it's not all love and light in general. But I would say that, the trickiest thing about all this is trying to separate the culture from the primary experience, which, I'd be kicked out of religious studies for even talking, for even talking about the concept of a primary experience that could be, a generator of religious beliefs. But it's just, I think it's so hard to disentangle. And, one of the things that I think my work has moved on from earlier scholars who were looking at cross-cultural NDEs was this real sort of obsession with trying to figure out what exactly is universal. So, okay, surely everybody has a tunnel. Actually, no, they don't. They all go through darkness. So that's a more sort of general universal idea. And then what about the life review? The life review is actually really rare outside of Western accounts. You don't really come across them all that common in other cultures. So, all I can say is two things. One is that I think people actually experience the experience while it's happening according to their culture. So I think they genuinely see or believe or interpret what they're seeing as, Jesus or whatever. But it's also obvious that once they're back from the experience and they're explaining it, recounting it to whoever's listening or writing about it, there's got to be some degree of elaboration, even if it's just in the process of making sense and putting it into a linear narrative. So it's understandable by other people. But then if that person is an evangelical type, or if they're have an idea about writing a book that they saw heaven and getting on the New York Times bestseller list, then they're going to elaborate even more. As the case with, there's Native American examples as well, where they just go on and on and on. And there's, sometimes 20 pages of an NDE, or some of the medieval European examples. They're just incredibly long and totally unbelievable. But again, there might be some grain of actual experience that the narrative was based on. So I think that's the best kind of answer I could give.
Brilliant.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. And we're going to have to push through, because we've got another 3 hand raises and another 3 written questions. So say maybe we'll have to push somewhat into the break session in order to get most of them answered, and still got a few for Jim as well. Phil. Or Carlos. Okay, so I'm assuming you want me to ask the question for you, but I don't have one written down, so I don't know if you're... So, okay, so we'll go for Jan. Phil, if you let me know if you what the question actually is, and we'll get onto it. Dr. Jan Holden.
Hi, Darren. Hi, Gregory.
Hi, Jan.
Good to see you.
You too.
I was going to sort of try to save people from the trauma of seeing me not dressed yet for the day, but I decided to be brave, and it's only material anyway, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So 2 things caught me in your presentation. One is you were talking about that German case that's never been translated into English, and I wondered if you would translate it and publish it in the journal.
Sorry, that was the Egyptian case that's only been translated into German. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Think about publishing that in the journal. I'd love to see it out there, yeah.
Thanks.
And I've come to a conceptualization, I'm interested to hear your reaction, that near-death experiences have like 3 structures or levels. There's a deep structure that involves elements that are common across cultures.
Yeah.
And as you said, there are not a whole lot of features, but there are a few that seem to be common across cultures. And then those take a form that is that's like the deep structure. Then the first level of surface structure is the cultural level, where either culture influences how the person experienced the NDE, and or it influences how they describe it, because we we can only describe things in the terms that we have in earthly life. And then that there's a third level that those cultural ones are then expressed in a uniquely individual way, because no two NDEs are alike. So I wonder what you think about that, and I'll take your response off camera.
Okay. I think that's absolutely correct. And part of the reason I say that is because that's exactly what I argued in my first book. I almost literally. So I sort of laid out this schema of structure, mytheme, and symbol, which I borrowed a little bit from Levi-Strauss's, an anthropologist's, ideas just about myth and religion in general. So the idea was the structure is the near-death experience itself, just the narrative. Mythemes are the sort of general things like leaving the body, seeing the being of light, and seeing whatever other kind of experiences going on. And then the symbol is how those mythemes are expressed specifically. So leaving the body just by rising out of it, leaving it on a dragon in some Chinese cultures, or on a rope in some other cultures, literally climbing up a rope. And then these, another symbolic example would be the identity of the being of light. So you have, Jesus or the Buddha or whatever. So I think that's actually a really good way to look at it. And I did an article on dreams in ancient Egypt and Greece, and I came up with the same idea. And it's basically that there are universal, cultural, and individual layers of meaning to any kind of cross-cultural religious type of belief or experience.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks very much. So the next question is from Phil. So he asks, the question was, is the Egyptian Book of the Dead similar to the Tibetan Book of the Dead? And also, the Egyptian Book of Dead speaks of a ceremony with teas like the shamans of... Also, does the Egyptian Book of the Dead speak of a ceremony with teas like the shamans of South America?
No to the last one. It's... and this will sort of answer about the Tibetan Book of the Dead as well. It's a very difficult text to kind of puzzle out and make sense of, because it's really a ritual formula to be recited for funerary purposes when the person's being interred. So it's a lot less of a kind of intelligible, linear narrative than the Tibetan Book of the Dead would be. So it's, a lot of it, the research on it has to be kind of gleaned by reference to other texts and to Egyptian history and other elements of Egyptian religious beliefs and myth. It itself is based on the pyramid texts, which are more ancient, and then the coffin texts came next. So the Book of the Dead is kind of mostly based on those earlier ones, which again are very, very difficult. There's the main kind of linear narratives are progressing through the afterlife and very detailed descriptions about going through this gate and then meeting this demon and almost getting your head cut off by this demon and that sort of thing. But then it will jump to suddenly being in a celestial field, and then you're on a boat going around the sun. So it's a lot of it's still not quite well understood, really. But nothing about overtly about shamans or shamanism. I mean, there probably were some kind of shaman equivalents in ancient Egypt, but we just don't really know about them.
Perfect. Okay, great. 3 more, if you've got the stamina to manage it, Doctor.
Sure, yeah.
Mara asks, haven't there been cases where the being of light has been the opposite of what was culturally expected? For instance, a Buddha seeing Jesus?
That in particular, I'm not sure about a Buddha seeing Jesus. A Buddha seeing Jesus. But there are lots of cases of people seeing things that they didn't expect, and not just about beings of light, but all kinds of phenomena. And I think the most dramatic example of that, and this is really one of the things that's on the side of the survivalist interpretation of NDEs, is that atheists will, people with absolutely no belief in an afterlife at all, will have a full-blown NDE, seeing a being of light, seeing their deceased relatives, fully experiencing leaving the body and seeing their corpse below and all that. So, that's I think the most dramatic example of going fully against expectations. And somebody like I don't know, me, who I wasn't really raised in a particular religious environment. I was exposed to Catholicism, Judaism, Hare Krishna religion, and just various kinds of religious ideas. I have no idea what I would see, and if what I did see would be objective or not. A great example of a non-religiously indoctrinated, but a sort of cross-culturally indoctrinated NDE is that of Carl Jung, which is pretty famous. I won't describe it because we're running out of time, but if you have a chance, read Carl Jung's NDE if you haven't.
Great, thanks very much. Pascal.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, thanks.
Brilliant. Hi, Gregory. Thank you so much for your talk.
Thanks.
So you're bringing back the Levi Strauss idea about the structure, themes, and symbol. And I use I adopted that kind of idea in a talk I did for my PhD, looking at psychedelics and near-death experiences, because the kind of base, more structural features, and then the content, to me, it really, really, really works nicely, because my background is kind of neuroscience as well, that the features, these kind of grosser themes, could theoretically, be more explicable in terms of certain neural modules, neural networks sort of activating, and then the content is really quite propagated via culture. Mm-hmm. So I wonder what you kind of think about that sort of formulation of thinking about things, if that works in your mind.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. That's where I said earlier that the kind of work I'm doing can be enlisted by both sides. So you can say, if near-death experience is just a purely neurophysiological phenomenon, it has a cultural overlay because we're all, enculturated individuals. And then when we recount it, then obviously we add, more culture on top of that and interpretation. So, that's a conceivable way we can say, we're accounting for differences and we're accounting for similarities with a totally materialist theory. But you can just flip that and do it the exact same argument for survival afterlife theory. You can say, everybody survives death. We have the same kind of general experiences like leaving the body and whatever. It's just that they're not all in the brain. Instead, they're actually veridical. So this is where it's easy to just it seems like a lot of things in NDE studies reach that impasse at some point or another. So
yeah, thank you. And I think the content as well, the kind of detailed content, if you don't think about it culturally and you do take this more veridical idea, it can still be subsumed in a kind of broader sense of what the afterlife may look like, because we're seeing through a glass darkly, aren't we? And so the afterlife, it could well be this in a kind of imaginal sense, where the imagination has some maybe fundamental reality. It's like a shared posthumous kind of dream, which can account for all of those different spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the places I do wade into those ideas in my research, getting out of the strictly cultural stuff. That in my last book, Near-Death Experience in Indigenous Religions, I talk quite a bit about that what kind of afterlife could be possible if we just accept all of these kinds of experiences at face value. And I basically argued something very much like that, which was, I was first exposed to that idea with the writings of H.H. Price, who was a British philosopher, and he called it the mind-dependent afterlife, which is basically it's a sort of lucid dream state in the other world, which, you know, there's Buddhist ideas that also correspond to that, which is interesting. But it's a sort of co-created reality. So it's not just your mind making everything up, but your mind in conjunction with the minds of other souls in the other world, which is interesting also because it reflects, you know, this life in many ways, you know, not in such a profound way, but we do all sort of create shared realities here. And I think that, you know, just on that note, the similarities and differences between people in this world, I don't see why they wouldn't also be reflected in an afterlife state. We don't suddenly become, you know, cultureless beings.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we have one last question for Dr. Shushan, then we'll move into the break period, because I'd like to give Ramses the opportunity to share an experience that he's facing at the moment, if you'd like to do that, Ramses. If not, no worries at all. But the last question for Dr. Shushan from Edward. I've heard conflicting reports about autoscopy. Sam Parnia claims no success after real experiments, but I read contrary reports at the time. Any thoughts?
Yeah, as far as I know, the controlled experiments, you know, like Sam Parnia and Pim Ben Lommel and Peter Fennick, Penny Sartori, they've all done these experiments of putting symbols on tops of medical equipment in cardiac wards, with the idea that if the person leaves the body and floats out of it and they look down, they will be able to say what those symbols were. Unfortunately, from what I know, they've all said things. The people that have actually had NDEs said, you know, well, I was looking at my body at the time. It's a lot more dramatic of a thing to see, your own body lying there while you're outside of it, than like, you know, a picture of a star or a circle on top of a monitor. So they just basically didn't notice it. So yeah, as far as I know, there hasn't been a confirmed controlled case, but there have been a lot of, you know, again, so-called anecdotal cases where observations were made around the area of the temporarily dead body that were veridical and, you know, demonstrated to be so afterwards. And I think in the AWARE study, I think the Sam Parnia, I think there was a really interesting case that he did have. It wasn't of autoscopy, but it was, they were able to pinpoint the exact moment that a patient had vertical observations within the operating room. I don't remember the exact details, but if you look up the AWARE study, it's in there. And I thought, like, again, that's a really remarkable case, and it seemed to have sort of had short shrift because it wasn't the dramatic kind of evidence that they were aiming for, but it was, you know, nevertheless some really interesting evidence.
Brilliant. Thank you, Doctor, for your brilliant presentation and all the questions that were fired at you. You certainly had a lot
I
more
should
questions
add
than I
actually
thought.
that you know, all these NDEs that I'm talking about, these historical and cross-cultural ones, I'm putting them together in Anthology, which will be called the Historical Anthology of Near-Death Experiences. And at the moment, I have about 150 just ones that I've prepared, and so there's literally hundreds more to get through. And the more I look for them, the more I find them. So hopefully there will be an end to the project. But I just kind of wanted to put that out there that you know, this isn't just a few cases. There are hundreds of them cross-culturally and throughout history.
Sure. Thanks very much. Okay, so we'll move now into the break portion. So if anybody wants to either go and get a drink or do anything during this 10 minutes now before Bill Guggenheim's presentation, now is your opportunity. Before Ramses, I jump in, I just have to get this out of the way, the bit that I hate. Everything that I provide through Seeking Eye is completely free of charge, and I try to always make that the case. But I do work through a donation system, which is completely up to you. There's no obligation whatsoever. But if you'd like to give something to help me continue my research, if you go to seeking-eye.com, you'll find two links there, one to Donor Box for one-off donations, one on Patreon for monthly support. Completely up to you, but always have to throw that out there, and I always feel like an idiot for doing it. But never mind. Okay, Ramses, if you'd like to share your experience, that's completely free for you to do so now.
I would love, actually, because it's been like killing me. It's like since I was born, I knew that I was born in the wrong country, and for some reason, I knew that I was born in the wrong body. I have memories of my previous life clear, and I didn't have this like opportunity to share. I am from Brazil right now, but I knew that I was born in LA, Los Angeles. I knew that I was from the 60s, and I knew that I was a woman. So my mom's always told me, like, you were so different, kid, because you were in Brazil, but you don't like talking Portuguese, and you were always connecting to this language that you don't understand. So for her, it was, I'm crying, I'm sorry, guys. It's so painful. So I never actually understood why I am here. So I seek my entire life to move to United States, and I did. So I moved to United States. I lived there for a while. I went to Los Angeles because that was my place. And then when I was there, the first thing I did was to try to actually start the sex change, because I was not getting to this body, because I knew that I was a woman. But for some reason, I had a near-death experience because something went wrong, and I was in coma, and that was in Colorado when I did my surgery. I did actually some other things before the sex change. And so I had a more other experience with near-death experience. So I was there. Since then, that was in 2017, yes. Since then, I don't know if I am in the dream. I don't believe in this reality anymore. If I think Jim will understand me, people that actually been with this kind of like people around, this is so surreal. This actually place that we are is not real. And I have always like, last night I was there again, because they are always inviting me, whoever they are, whoever you call. But I was part of like some court of music. I was part of, I don't know how to explain, but I was always into music in this place that I was. That's why I came singing opera. I always sing opera. I always did this kind of things when I was a child. I don't know why. But then I disconnected. And now I'm connecting again through my dreams. Because when I am there, I am always with the orchestra, and I'm always with people that actually plays music. But this seems so unreal, if you know what I'm saying. This, for many people, I think you're seeking for a near-death experience. So as I said, I'm Brazilian, and I hate speaking my language. And I'm 42, and I've been living this life since I was a child, that I know that I am in the wrong place, in the wrong body. So I'm just trying to get, out a little bit, because it's been dragging me for many and many years. You don't seem like you're complete. You don't seem like you're full, because you know that you are not from here, because that's my memories. I was not. I remember my mom. I remember the place I was raised. I couldn't find, that's why I was there in LA, but I couldn't find, this answers I was seeking for. And this group actually opened a new reality for me. That's why when I saw this group, it was just like, okay, I am in the right place, because I need to put it out. It's been killing me. Thank you.
You're muted. There you go.
Yeah. Now I think I'm unmuted. Okay. Ramses. Yeah. One thing I did not talk about, I mentioned briefly the sex change cases, but I really didn't talk about international cases. International cases are where you're not born, in the country, that you lived before, but in a different country. Those cases are in the minority, but they exist, and they are particularly difficult for people to deal with. And you're describing very well what it is like. What I hear from so many people who had to go through this, who remember having, being of a different culture and having difficulty with the language, having difficulty with the culture, and then on top of that, also the sex change, which again is something that people have a lot of difficulty with, and in childhood, it can be limited just to behaviors that are more appropriate for the other gender. But if it lasts into adulthood, you can get into transgender stuff, and it's very, very profound. Combining those two together, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, Ramses, if you look in the chat window, you'll see how much support you have from everyone here.
Thank you so much, y'all. Thank you. It's the first time I can actually talk about it. It's been like killing me. I've never said that to anyone, because who was going to say that? Who is going to understand that? So I always kept quiet. Especially this evening, I was there, and they took me. And I slept my mom said for 15 hours. It was that, because I didn't want to wake up. Because it's much better to be that side, It is so much better. So when you are awake, it's like, okay, here you go. You're in Brazil again, and you're speaking Portuguese again. And then you're in another country again. And so all the things comes, And thank you for the support. Thank you for the love. You guys understand how it is difficult, I think. You can relate to that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramses. Okay, so Bill Guggenheim, I believe, has yet to arrive, and he's due to start his presentation on after-death communications on 25 minutes past. He's the author with his ex-wife Judy Guggenheim of Hello from Heaven, which was effectively the book that started the whole field. So I think what we'll do while we're waiting to see if he turns up is, Jim, there are a couple of questions that we weren't able to get to, if you'd like to have them posed.
Sure.
Okay, perfect. So,
can I just jump in here?
Sure, absolutely.
It's Karen Stein. This is for Ramses. I put a link to a Facebook group in the chat.
Thank you, Karen.
That if you join, you will find some situation.
You got that link, Ramses? It's a Facebook group, so yeah.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. So, Jim, back to your questions. Pascal asks, are you or any other researchers actually working hand in hand with scholars of religion, so as the science and religion are genuinely complementing and benefiting one another?
Yeah, I wish there were more of that. Maybe it's something. I mean, Gregory and I have had our differences sometimes in print, but that's something that I think that I would enjoy working with him on. Actually, I would like to see more of that. He's one of the few people in religious studies that actually will get into the experiential things. He's better qualified to talk about that than I am. But so many in the religious studies fields are interested more in beliefs and in the cultural aspects of it than actually getting into the experiences. Whereas for me, as I was explaining, it's experience is what it's all about, because I'm more interested in the science of it, right? And not just, the academic understanding of it, how it functions in a culture, how it functions in religion, but actually the truth aspect of it, right, of religion, which is a different thing. It's not a religious issue, right? I'm trying to make it a scientific issue.
That's a good distinction. Yeah. But I'll just chime in and say that in religious studies, the way it has morphed into the contemporary world, it's you're not supposed to be comparing religions across cultures. So just it used to be called comparative religion, and now there's no more comparing. And that's the idea behind that, is they wanted to distinguish themselves from theology, and not have this idea that we're comparing all other religions to our true religion, which is Christianity. So they threw the baby out with the bathwater there. But I mentioned earlier too that the idea that there can be a type of experience upon which religions are based, even that is like, you're not supposed to say that in the study of religions now.
Yeah.
That's like transgressing into theology. They would say you're a crypto theologian, that you're secretly trying to get this universalist agenda into religious studies, which obviously I don't buy it.
Yeah. You see the same sort of thing in anthropology. My professional field is anthropology. The same thing in anthropology. I mean, they've gone away from the comparative. They hate the comparative. Everything has to be. You have to look everything in one culture, right? And yeah. So I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
Brilliant. And the last one for Jim. I'm trying desperately hard to get hold of Bill to see where he is, but we'll carry on for now. Lisa asks Jim, does reincarnation indicate that the number of existences are finite? Meaning, are we recycling a certain number of souls and the others are backdrop? Reference to Dolores Cannon writings.
Yeah, well, I mean, you bring up Dolores Cannon, you're getting into regression stuff, and it should be very clear that the work that I'm doing, that I'm championing here, Stevenson's, has nothing to do with the regressions. When you get into regressions, you're in a totally different area here. A lot of speculation, a lot of fantasy, a lot of stuff that we really, I'm sorry, I must be getting tired. I've sort of lost the thread here. There was could you repeat the question, the first part of it?
Yep, sure. Does reincarnation indicate that the number of existences are finite? Meaning, are we recycling a certain number of souls? Yep, that's kind of the first part of that question.
Right. Well, there's really no way of answering that question. There really isn't. I mean, it's really basically a philosophical question. I mean, I won't even make it a theoretical question, because there's no way of saying one way or another whether it's right that I see. So we simply don't know. I mean, and there are different ways that we can think of conceiving of this, of when when reincarnation started, and part of the question is that when did reincarnation start? When did we start reincarnating, right? And those are different questions. I tend to think that reincarnation probably started when life started. As soon as there was life and death, there was reincarnation of the consciousness stream that's separate from the biological body. And that takes it back a very, 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 very long time. And if, so part of that would be that our consciousness has evolved, just as our bodies have evolved, right? But so in principle, you could say that we've all had an infinite number of lives, in an infinite number of species, maybe many different species, before we became human. But I don't think, and nobody's asked this question yet, I don't see much evidence that the consciousness of different species moves back and forth among the species. Animals, non-human animals do seem to reincarnate, but they reincarnate in their own species lines. What I think happens is that consciousness does evolve, but consciousness evolves to work in a given type of body, and so in the same way that our bodies change and new species develop, our consciousness then develops to work in these new bodies. So You know, in principle, we could have had many, many, many different lives, and there's just no way of knowing how many. Another possible way of looking at this is that the consciousness streams are pulled out of what we maybe call a background consciousness, right? But here and now we're getting into sort of religious ideas, and but but we're talking philosophy now, because there's really no way to really look at this other than to think about it philosophically, right? So another way of addressing this whole issue is to imagine that there is this background consciousness, right? That souls, let's use that word, are pulled out of when they're needed, right? And in that case, then all bets are off about how many lives we have. We could have fewer, we could have many, we just don't know.
That's all the questions now for Jim. I'm still desperately trying to get in contact with Bill, but he doesn't seem to be responding at the moment, so I'm not sure exactly what we should do from here, but I will let you know that if you're interested in mainly the phenomena of near-death experiences and others, the Netflix documentary Surviving Death, myself and Dr. Jan Holden, as well as some others, are going to be live streaming tomorrow on the Seeking Eye YouTube channel a comprehensive review of every episode of that, being fair and as open as possible. Many of the reviews that we see around online are very one-sided, or one way or the other, so we're going to try and be split down in the middle with myself, Jan, and 3 skeptics, and we are doing a comprehensive overview of every episode and what we personally think it offers evidentially for near-death experiences, mediumship, after-death communication, and reincarnation. And thankfully I've got one last episode to go and about 9 pages worth of notes, so that's going to be interesting. Jan, you're going to be absolutely sick of me by the time that's over. You have your hand raised, Jan. You'd like to say something?
I do. Well, if you're not able to get hold of Bill, I would be happy to present my presentation on after-death communication from Beyond the Brain conference last fall. I also have done research on ADC and actually have a very positive thing to say about Bill and his work. So yeah, so if you would like, I could do that, or if you want to do something else, that's fine as well.
That'd be a good idea. As I say, I've left Bill messages and he hasn't seen them, so he must have either forgotten or something's come up. Hopefully he's okay. Yeah. So yeah, Jan, if you'd like to do your presentation, that'd be great, and I'm sure nobody would object.
I'll share my screen of my PowerPoint, and let's play it from the start. Is everybody seeing this, the first page of the PowerPoint? Yes, good. I'm seeing nods, so that's great. Okay, so first I'm going to define what after-death communication is. And it's a phenomenon in which a living person has a feeling or sense of direct contact with a physically deceased person or animal. And that we're in this presentation, I'm going to focus primarily on spontaneous after-death communication, but at the end, I'll mention something about induced or facilitated after-death communication. Yeah, it could be spontaneous or facilitated, which is sometimes called induced, but I don't like that word, and I prefer facilitated. So research on spontaneous after-death communication. In 2011, my doctoral student, Jenny Streithorn at the University of North Texas, did her doctoral dissertation, a systematic review of all published research on ADC, and that included Bill's work. 35 studies actually had been published between the late 1800s and 2006, and altogether these studies included over 50,000 people from 24 different countries. So it was very cross-cultural, and I was surprised that there were that many studies, but that's what she found when she really scraped the literature. I want to jump to something that I might forget to say later, and that is, after Jenny was all done, and she had read everything that had been published on after-death communication, both in peer-reviewed and the general book literature. I said to her, if somebody came to you and said, you've read everything on ADC, if I wanted to read just one thing to give me the best information about near-death experiences, what would it be? And she said, Bill Guggenheim and Judy Guggenheim's book, Hello from Heaven. So after all that research, that was the single, she still sees it as the single best resource. So a little plug for that book. And it's very inexpensive to buy online, chock full of cases that the two of them gleaned. They gleaned thousands of cases. And then it so happened in 2011 that I also was invited to serve on the PhD thesis committee for doctoral student Michelle Knight at the University of Sydney. And she did a qualitative study, which is where she did several in-depth interviews with 21 adult after-death communicators in Sydney. So between the two of them, you've got the quantitative work of Jenny and then the qualitative work of Michelle. It provides a really, what in research we call a mixed method kind of combination here. So it's from these two studies that I'm drawing what I'm about to tell you. And and I don't want to forget to say that most recently, Evelyn Elsacer and Chris Rowe and another few people as a research group did a study of ADC, and I think their participants were European. And so if you just Google Evelyn Elsacer, you'll get to her webpage, and the results are available right there, very detailed results. First of all, ADC takes numerous forms. It can be something like a sense of presence without any specific sensory content. So just like the very definite sense that a disembodied loved one is here, even though I'm not seeing them, I'm not hearing them, I just very distinctly feel their presence. And then there are experiences that do have sensory content, and the sensory content can be visual, that I see them. I might see them as just like we're seeing each other right now, solid and so forth. Or I might see them kind of translucently. I might see them out in the environment. I might see them in my mind's eye. So all of those are the visual forms. It can be auditory, where I hear something that sounds like it's coming from the environment, the disembodied person communicating with me, or it can be in my mind's ear. I hear it like in my mind. It can be olfactory, where I smell something, and or tactile, where I feel the disembodied person's hug or touch on my hand or something along those lines. So it can take any of those sensory forms or any combination. Sometimes ADCs include two or more of those sensory modalities. It can also be symbolic, where, let me go back, where something happens that doesn't directly involve the disembodied person, but seems like a very clear message from the person. And so just to give you an idea, a young woman's mother died shortly before her wedding. And so after the wedding, the woman is and I should say her mother had given her 4 or 5 $50 bills to put away in different places in case she ever needed them in an emergency. So one night she goes out to dinner with her new husband, and when they finish, they discover that the restaurant takes only cash, and neither of them have enough cash. She pulls out the $50 bill, and she was really reluctant to give it away because it was the last one that she had from her mother. So it had this nostalgic meaning, but she had to use it, so she gave it away. So so after dinner, they go to Target, which is, if you're in the UK, it's like a general purpose kind of store. And as they're walking up to this one aisle, she says to her husband, "Oh, we're about to walk down the women's makeup aisle." And that has a lot of meaning for me because my mom and I used to come here and shop for makeup together. And as they're walking down the aisle, there in front of them is a $50 bill lying on the floor. And so it just seemed very like the odds were just too great that something like this would happen just when it did. So that's a symbolic ADC. And then there are electronic ones where there's a book called Telephone Calls from the Dead. People have had things happen electronically, like getting a like on something from the disembodied person whose phone has been disabled. And, so it's kind of like, how could they have put a like on something like that? And these experiences are usually individual and personal, but they can be shared. More than two people can experience the same ADC, like more than two people might see the disembodied person or hear their voice or something like that, and later check. In fact, it's Darren, you'll have to monitor me on time, okay? Because I have all these stories, but one of the first ADCs I ever heard of when I began formally interviewing people was a woman who had had a near-death experience. That's really why I was interviewing her. And after we were all done, we were, heading toward the door, she told me about this situation. After her NDE, sometime a couple of years later, her mother-in-law was diagnosed with cancer. And long story short, she and her husband and their then child moved in with the mother-in-law. They sold their own house or left their apartment wherever they'd been living, and they lived with the mother-in-law to care for her. And she lived for about a year, and then she died. So they, sold and gave away all her stuff and sold the house and moved into their own place. And about a month or two later, this woman, her name was Jan, not me, it just so happens her name also is Jan, woke up in the middle of the night, and there at the end of her bed was her mother-in-law, the deceased mother-in-law. And Jan communicates, she's like, in her mind, it's like, what are you doing here? And her mother-in-law communicates to her telepathically, I'm just here to check on everybody. So her mother-in-law turns and starts walking out the door, and Jan gets out of bed and follows her. She goes into the first child's room and just stands there and watches the child. And after about 30, 45 seconds, the child starts to like move and be like, kind of like it's responding to being watched. And the mother-in-law turns, walks out the door. Jan and her husband had had another baby in the interim during this time. She goes into the baby's room, same thing. And then she turns and leaves and starts walking down the hall. Jan follows her and she just disappears. Well, what was striking to Jan is that she was wearing a jumper, which is a kind of dress that Jan had made for her, that she had always said was her favorite dress. But Jan knew that she had given that dress to charity. So here's her disembodied mother-in-law wearing this dress that she knows is gone. And it's like, okay. So in the morning, she tells her husband, and they decide not to tell anybody. So a few months later, they're having a family reunion. It's late at night. The children have all gone to bed. People have been drinking a little wine. And Jan's sister-in-law, her husband's sister, says, okay, y'all, I have to tell you something. And she said, a few months ago, in the middle of the night, Mom came to visit me. And I got the sense that she was just checking on our well-being. And she turned to Jen and she said, you know, the weird thing, she was wearing that jumper you made her that she always said was her favorite dress. So here somebody had apparently the identical experience, but they hadn't communicated with each other until later. So that's a shared kind of near-death or after-death communication. So the circumstances include, they occur in all states of health, from being perfectly healthy to being on one's deathbed. And people do a lot of times see disembodied loved ones when they're on their deathbeds. Like this is real common in hospice that people report this. They occur in all states of consciousness. You can be completely alert and awake like we are now, hopefully. You could be sleeping, meditating, in a coma during a near-death experience. They just occur in all states of consciousness. Sleep ADC may be the most common. And in the literature, this is often referred to as dream ADC. However, ADCers usually say that the experience, even though it happened while they were asleep, was completely unlike dreams. It was absolutely real, not your crazy kind of plot like you have in dreams. And usually it's, fairly short and sweet. And so I think that this is a lot like the experience feels real both during, which is true for dreams, but also after. Normally you wake up from a dream and you think, wow, no matter how real that felt, I know it wasn't real. Now, when people wake up in the morning and they remember the experience, which also is not typical for dreams, to remember a dream you had in the middle of the night, they still feel like it was real. And the experiences tend to be fixed and unchanging in memory, unlike dreams that, as you probably know, are very ephemeral and hard to hang on to unless you write them down and really record them. So they're really different than dreams, even though they occur while we're asleep. I was telling one of my former doctoral students we were talking about this, and she comes from Iran originally, and she said that in Persian, there are two words. There's roya, which means dream, and then roya sedache, which means a true vision, both of which occur in sleep. And for those of you who speak Persian, I apologize for what I just did to that term. Prevalence, at least 1 in 3 people report ADC sometime in their life. So if you just walk down the street and say, have you ever had the experience of the presence or communication with a deceased person or animal? 1 out of 3 people will say yes. But if you ask people within the first year after the death of a loved one, it goes up to 3 out of 4 people. And so it's kind of an interesting thing about, most people have lost a loved one. And so if 3 out of 4 have an ADC in that first year, how come walking down the street, you don't get, 3 out of 4 people, or at least more than 1 out of 3? And there are a lot of possible explanations for that we won't go into, because I know we have little time. They may occur once or multiple times to the same person. So they range in frequency. And usually, but not always, they decrease over time, especially after the death of a loved one. They'll happen most often early on and then decrease over time, usually, but not always. And then the role of culture, as we just heard from Gregory, they do play a role in terms of, for example, we know that in cultures that are more accepting of ADC is reported more. For example, Iceland is apparently the friendliest culture to ADC, and they're reported just at much more frequently than 1 out of 3. So culture plays a role in certainly how willing people are to reveal that they've had an ADC. because of course there's the risk of being discounted, being pathologized, you're crazy, being demonized, this is evil stuff, if those are the cultural values around ADC. But culture may influence even how much people experience ADC. This is one of those things that's kind of hard to tell, even from the most careful research. So the demographics of experiencers, it happens to bereaved and non-bereaved, both. More often to the bereaved, but it can happen to the non-bereaved. The incidence is higher among bereaved, happens to both men and women. The incidence is higher among women, the incidence of report, maybe not the experience, but certainly the report. And otherwise, it's an equal opportunity experience. It occurs to people in any demographic or factor you can think of. It occurs to everybody, including belief system. You can completely not believe in ADC and you'll still have it. In fact, what Michelle found among her 21 Sydney people was that if they already believed in the survival of consciousness after death, the ADC or ADCs just reinforce that belief. If they didn't have that belief, if they didn't believe in survival of consciousness after death before the ADC, they believed it after. So the experience was very influential. There is no relationship to mental disorder. This has actually not been directly studied, but Jenny found that many of the researchers, those 35 studies, commented in their discussion sections that all the people they'd interviewed seemed well, not all, but just people seem perfectly mentally healthy, much like you would find in the general population. So there, and I've done some research since then, haven't published the results yet, but absolutely there's just no relationship to mental disorder. Now, it doesn't mean that people with mental disorders don't have ADC, but they have them at about the same rate as people without mental disorder. So, so I did research on, the effects are overwhelmingly positive. People describe them as pleasant, elating, positive, comforting, healing. That was from Jenny's dissertation. And I just talked about this and that and that. And Michelle prefers to use the word disembodied because it is more respectful of how ADCers experience the experience, that this is truly the disembodied spirit or whatever word consciousness of the person or animal. And so I did a study about ADC and the biblical fruit of the spirit. This might be a good place to pause and say, how are we doing on time, Darren? Do I need to stop?
To be honest, the whole time thing's gone pretty much out the window, so don't worry about it. We'll keep going. You mentioned about other death experiences from animals.
From what?
From animals.
Oh, animals,
yeah.
Yes.
If I could, I'd like to jump in and just share an experience that I've had recently. I can't remember if I've told you about it, Jan, the foxes. Did I tell you about it? I did. So for anybody that's interested, my two little dogs, Ty and Omi, miniature schnauzers, we lost both of them on the same day on January the 8th. Ty was 14 and he'd been suffering from kidney failure for a long time, so we knew he was on the way out. Omi, who was 12, it's funny, the day before we put them down, we took them to the vets. We took Omi, to the vets to have his teeth checked because he wasn't eating and we knew that his teeth were bad, so we thought we'd get it checked out. And it was a free consultation. They said he's not letting us touch his abdomen, so we want to check it out. They did an ultrasound or an ultra scan, and they found that his liver had 3 huge tumours on them, and it was blown up way bigger than it should have been, and he was in pain. So we had to make the decision there and then to have them put to sleep the next day because it wasn't fair. Now, Ty had been going absolutely fine. Despite having the kidney failure, he was absolutely fine. Bit slow, struggled to walk and get up every now and then, but he had no real major effects. That night at 4:30 in the morning, he suffered a stroke and didn't do too well. but he seemed all right. And then the morning that he was due to be put down, I think 6:30 or so in the morning, he had a huge seizure, and ended up completely out of it. And that was the morning I contacted the vets. Luckily, we had a vet that we could bring that would come home to put them to sleep. And we said, this is a situation. She said, yeah, they need to go. We need to do this now. So they ended up both going together, and that was a hell of a blow, losing 2 dogs together, especially when the day before Omi was perfectly fine. We had nothing to expect. Now, that was very, very hard, and it still is. On the 20th, I decided, I watched, actually, funnily enough, Jan, I was watching the Netflix series on After Death Communication, and I saw the account of the woman who had the red cardinal come to her. And I thought, that's unusual. Maybe if a cardinal can be influenced to do something like that, maybe I can have something similar. And because my favourite animal is the fox, I think they're adorable creatures. I said to Tainomi, I said, if you can you send me a tame fox, just so I know it's you. And I've been living in the same house now for 23 years, and I've never seen a fox in my life around here. Granted, I didn't really go out much, but I've never seen a fox here in 23 years. 3 days following that, we were out on a walk, and a fox jumped out in front of us in the road. And I thought, that's unusual. I mean, we'd only just recently started walking at night, so my brain was there thinking, well, I've never been out, so maybe this actually happens quite often, and I'm just lucky. It wasn't tame, just ran out across the road. So I kind of thought, that's nice, but I'd let it pass. 2 or 3 days following that, we were out walking again, and a second fox comes and runs out in front of the road in front of us. And I thought, okay, this is getting quite unusual now. And and I thought that was interesting. Then I think another 2 or 3 days after that, a third runs out in front of us across the road, very, very close by. And I think, okay, 3 in 2 weeks after 23 years of nothing. Granted, I haven't really been out at night, but even so, that's weird. And what was more interesting is I found that, I'll tell you about the third one as well, but on all the cases were nights I was specifically thinking more about Tainomi and thinking, wouldn't it be nice if they could send me that fox today? And I'd be asking repeatedly in my mind, please send me that fox. Please. And it was only on the days when I was really thinking about it more that they came. And on the third day, Dad came with us on the walk, and I thought, well, every time Dad's been out, we've seen absolutely nothing, so if you can send me a fox at this time, it'll be incredible. And I think it was about 5 minutes after I thought that the fox started out in front of all of us, and I thought, okay, that's a bit unusual. And I just think that's a good example, because although it wasn't a tame fox, it was 3 foxes after 23 years of seeing nothing. So I just wanted to push that one in.
That's great. That's a symbolic ADC where you're getting the message from seeing the fox. And I think when you told me that, I may have told you, a gal in my group, my monthly group that meets, her dog died. And one day one of the things her dog liked to do was do like this in the carpet and kind of create a little bed for itself, right? Yeah. So one day she was cleaning shortly after her dog's death, she was cleaning her apartment, and she was vacuuming all the rooms. And as she would vacuum her room, she'd close the door and then, go on to the next room. And when she came back to the room where the dog used to spend the most time, as she walked in, there in the middle of the carpet was that dug up place, and like nobody had been in the room. She had just vacuumed the carpet. And so those are good examples.
Absolutely. Okay, so if you can finish off your presentation, then Jan, we'll do a few questions. It's now 10 o'clock, which is the official finishing time, but that's not to worry. So we'll just keep going for as long as anybody wants to be here.
Okay, good. And I'll try to be fast.
Sure, no worries.
There's some question about after-death communication, and whether it, in certainly conservative religious groups, can perceive it as evil or of the devil. Seeing deceased loved ones sounding like something that's prohibited in the Bible, called necromancy and that sort of thing. But at the same time, the Bible provides a litmus test for what is and is not, what does and does not derive from Holy Spirit. And it's a passage in Galatians that says essentially, if something yields love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, then it is of Holy Spirit. And there's just no arguing that if it generates these things, it does derive from Holy Spirit. So I did an online survey of people who'd experienced after-death communication, and I had 164 adult ADCers. Of course, I didn't tell them, I'm trying to see if you think this is from the Bible and the Holy Spirit. All I did was say, they were aged 21 to 86 with a mean age of 58 years, mostly female, mostly white. And so what I did was said, if you have had only one ADC, please describe it here. And if you've had more than one, please choose the one that you consider to be, or one of the ones you consider to be most impactful for whatever reason, whatever your reasoning that you consider impactful. And in answering the following questions, keep that ADC in mind. And so if you imagine so then in the questionnaire, the next question is, what effect did this experience have on your sense of love? Did it strongly increase, moderately increase, no effect, moderately decrease, or strongly decrease your sense of love? And then what effect did it have on your sense of joy? Strongly, moderately, no. And then peace, patience, kindness. Now, somebody who's really knowledgeable about the Bible might have seen the pattern, but I think most people probably didn't. So if you think about 164 people answering all these questions, there were a total of 146 1,476 responses. And this is what it looked like in charting their responses. The people, out of all those responses, the things, love, joy, peace, whatever, drastically increased over 20% of the time, increased over a third of the time, and had no effect about 40% of the time, decreased 0.8% of the time, and drastic decrease. There was one person answered that way once out of 1,476 responses. So the responses were strongly in the direction that these experiences either had no effect or had a positive effect on the fruit of the Spirit. And another way of looking at it is, let's see if I can get this to, oh dear, there we go. Oh, sorry. Okay. Another way of looking at it is that if we took all the respondents who, if you look at all their responses, all they ever said was that it had no effect or increased, that was over 90% of people. And there were a few people who had included in their responses that it, was kind of neutral, had some positive, some negative, or no effect. And then again, 0.6, where there was strong, some kind of decrease in the fruit. So once again, the evidence indicates that these experiences very much load on the side of yielding the fruit of the Spirit, and therefore passing the litmus test that these experiences are, quote unquote, of the Holy Spirit, at least from a Christian perspective. So we do know that negative or distressing responses are rare, just like with near-death experiences. They do occur, but they're rare. And mostly when they do occur, it isn't the experience itself, but it's the person feeling confused or frightened due to lack of information or misinformation, or that the experience contradicts their belief system and creates some, psychological turmoil for them. So, and again, some Christians view them as evil or of the devil. And we talked about this already. So, so I thought I would give you some examples of a drastic increase in love. So these are quotes from actual participants who checked drastic increase in love, and then they were always invited to explain. And one person said, I felt a surge of love and gratitude for the reconciliation. So apparently there was some reconciliation in this ADC. I also felt great love for a universe which operates this way, that would provide a platform for there to be ongoing communication and reconciliation of apparently painful aspects of the relationship when the person was alive. Somebody who said their joy was increased said, since love bonds strengthened, I have to move my little guy, after her death, an increase in joy came right along with it. I feel so joyful that I got to be this child's mom, even though it was for such a short time. She just said that I'm still her mom. An ADC right in the middle of the survey. So as she's writing, she's hearing her child say, you're still my mom. So many of her friends came to our house after she died, told us fabulous stories, and that fills my heart with joy. So, so that was an example of joy. And then let's see if I can, yeah, good, peace. It's hard to explain, but I felt as if he was content where he was, and I didn't have to worry about him anymore. It was as if a burden had been lifted from me. So you can see how the person felt a lot of peace from that. And then patience. Quite simply, I used to be a loud hothead with no patience for people or anything I didn't think was right. I'm much more understanding now as a result of this after-death communication. For kindness, one person said, once you can rest in the peace of your awareness of what is, you look at the world completely differently. Your empathy for the suffering of others increases dramatically, and I continue to seek ways every day to make the world a better place. Everything I do because of the amazing gift of knowing that I received from the universe. Wow. Okay. Goodness. I began to see life as beauty again. The blue sky, the sunsets. I began to take nothing for granted. It was important to be my best self. Faithfulness. I knew Jesus and God in a much deeper, more connected way than just through going to a Catholic church and doing rituals. These experiences brought me to a much closer connection to the divine. I'm fully assured that I'm taken care of, that all my needs are met, that love is all that matters. Gentleness. Mostly I'm more gentle on myself and on others. I forgive myself and others more easily. We're all doing the best we can. Self-control. Self-control in the sense that I felt a deeper connection to my true self. It gave me a sense of strength and courage. So question, are they real or imaginary? Well, there is such a thing as veridical after-death communication, and that's where the ADCer receives information during the ADC that was not yet known to them or others and could not have been deduced, but is later verified as accurate nevertheless. And there are anecdotes and case studies scattered throughout the professional literature of this. They haven't been pulled together yet in a book like they have for near-death experiences in the book, The Self Does Not Die. But Elizabeth Kubler-Ross told a story like this, and I won't take the time to tell it. But I do, if this will work, I want you to hear John Wigglesworth's veridical after-death communication. So let's see now, you're probably not seeing that yet, are you? You're still seeing the PowerPoint? Okay, hang on while I stop sharing that and start sharing the, here he is. Okay, here we go. All right, here's John. Mm-hmm. I think. Yeah, here we go.
My father had passed away, and I was at home helping my mother get things in order. And I knew that he had had a gun, that it was a small 22 caliber pistol that she knew nothing about. And I knew that I needed to go and get my hands on it because she wouldn't know what to do with it. So I looked all over the house while I was at home visiting and being with her during this time. And I looked everywhere I could in the normal place it was at, and it was not there. Well, a few days went by, and I had gone into his office and looked through his desk and his things there, and I couldn't find it there. Looked in his car, I couldn't find it there. And then one day, a few days into this whole thing, I had a dream, and the dream was I was in the kitchen of the house that I grew up in, and I was walking down the stairs to the basement, and my father was like, he was talking to me off screen and telling me what to do. Oh, go downstairs and go. And I kept saying, Dad, I've already looked down here. It's not down here. He said, no, go down into my dark room. And I said, I've looked in your dark room, and I'm yelling up the stairs. And so he said, no, go into the dark room and go behind the cabinet against the wall. And between the wall and the cabinet, you will find the pistol is in there, wedged between the wall. And that was a dream. And the next morning I woke up and I just kind of discounted it. I never really did much about it. But then a few days went by again, and I said, I might go down there and take a look. And sure enough, I went downstairs and I looked behind the wall, and there it was, exactly where he had told me it was in a dream. And it was, and I have it now. I removed it from the house, and I still have that exact pistol. But it was never told to me ever that that's where it was, because that's never where he kept it. He always kept it up in his closet, the very top shelf of his closet. And he didn't tell anybody that he had it, and he didn't tell anybody where it was. And from that point on, I just knew. I just knew that there was something more.
I love how he concludes that by saying, that's when I knew that there is something more. In fact, I've written a song based on this. Someday maybe I'll share it with y'all. So let me get back to the PowerPoint, because we're almost done. This is where, in the original presentation, we had a time for sharing, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time for that here. And so there is this phenomenon called induced after-death communication, which is a counseling technique to facilitate ADC for people who are grieving. And if anyone wants information on that, you can contact me independently, and I'll send you to some resources.
And if I could if I can just quickly add as well, there is an interview I did on the Seeking Eye YouTube channel with
Botkin?
No, his trainee.
Graham Maxey.
Graham Maxey, yes, on the phenomena of induced after-death communication, which is always worth a watch if you're interested in that phenomena.
Perfect. That would be perfect. So go to Darren's interview, and you'll learn all about it. Graham is fantastic. So as I said, I didn't remember that I'd written this down, but Jenny said, Bill Guggenheim and Judy Guggenheim's book is the single best source. And I also wrote a chapter on ADC in a book called Connecting Soul, Spirit, Mind, and Body, which is available to read for free online. And recently, 2 booklets by Alsacer, as I mentioned, are available. And so let's see. Oh, and so here are the references. So you can see, like if you want to go to Evelyn's cases, you can lift the URLs from here. Here's how to get Bill and Judy's book, my chapter on ADC, the study on ADC and biblical fruits, Michelle's dissertation, and Jenny's dissertation. If you want to do more reading on these topics, I think these are probably the best, most up-to-date sources on the subject. So, okay, I'm done.
Hey, perfect. Thanks, Jan. Again, absolute lifesaver coming in when we needed you. Always there to help when need be.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Perfect. Right, so if we have any people who've had after-death communication experiences that'd like to share, or questions for Jan on her presentation and the phenomena in general, please do again use the raise hand function, and we'll see if we can find the time to get through them all. Otherwise, if nobody has anything they'd like to say or add, Tammy says, this conversation is so exciting. Thank you, Jan. She has these experiences almost on a daily basis, where my inner being, spirit family, etc. are communicating with me in a multitude of ways. Love this stuff. Brilliant. Thanks, Tammy. Very interesting. Every day. I'd love to be in that position. Okay, Ellie, over to you.
Hi. There we go. Yeah, so I've had only 2 experiences like this. It was with my grandfather, my father's father, who died before I was born. I lost my mother at 17. My father lost his father at 17. And his father came to me, and my father's name is Roger. And I was sitting at a dining room table in the sunlight. Everything was very peaceful. And all of a sudden I was hearing in my voice, like telepathically, I wasn't actually hearing, over and over, Raji, Raji, Raji. That was his nickname. And I had this overwhelming feeling of a father's love for his child. And then my grandfather said to me, again, like telepathically, and I knew it was him. I didn't see anything, but I felt his presence intensely, even though I'd never met him. There was no question it was him. And he said to me, I understand about the cards. And that meant nothing to me at all. And then he left. And my father is not into this stuff at all. But I thought I would anyway just pass that along, because it seemed like a message to my father. Mm-hmm. And we were speaking long distance. And when I told him that his father had come to me, and he said I'd understand about the cards, there was dead silence. And then he said, "What did you say?" Like in this dry, strained voice. And I told him again, and his response was, "Oh my God." So what happened was, his father back in 47 or 49 was taken to a hospital for a relatively standard procedure, and it went wrong, and he died. And none of his affairs were in order. This was unexpected. And afterwards, my father, who was 17 at the time, was going through his father's desk and found a pack of girly playing cards. And my father was so shocked that his father would have girly playing cards. He ripped them up and threw them away and never told anybody. And he told me that for years he had felt so guilty that he had ripped up something belonging to his beloved father.
Wow.
He still doesn't believe in this stuff, but
it's so perfect. So Ellie, I'm going to ask you a selfish question. Is your father still alive?
He is, yeah.
Do you think he would verify this story?
I think he would, yeah.
Okay, we're collecting veridical ADC, and this is exactly an example, because as you say, he said it was something he did in private. Nobody else saw it. Nobody knew it had happened. And so the only way that you could have known about it was getting the information from your grandfather, who apparently was watching when your father did this. And even after all this time wanted to, lift the guilt from your father. And so, but the point is that, it was something that nobody knew about. And this happens so often. I've experienced this myself, where I've gotten a message that made no sense to me. And I even sometimes really hesitated to tell the living person. And yet when I tell them, there'll be like either silence or tears, or just an immediate, "Oh my gosh, this is about this." And Suzanne Giesman, who's a medium, and of course that's a little different than ADC is a direct communication. Mediumship is where there is literally a medium of communication between the disembodied and and the living person has had this kind of experience too, where she gets a message from the disembodied, delivers it to the living person. They don't know what it's about, but it supposedly has something to do with some other family member. And then this person goes to that family member, and the family member says, oh my gosh, there was something that I did in private that nobody knew, that this just really convinces me that the disembodied are still with us. They're watching, they're involved in our lives. They care, they still care about us. So yeah. So Ellie, if you email me your story, I would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Is there anyone else with their hand up?
Sorry, I was just finishing typing something else. Anybody else with their hand up? Doesn't look like it at the moment. Although, yes,
wait,
Debbie.
I see Debbie waving.
That's
Hi,
right.
hi, Debbie.
Debbie, over to you.
Hi, I'm sorry. I forgot how to put the hand up in the chat.
No worries.
I've only recently started really having these. I mean, in my dreams, where I really knew that's what they are. And I'm sorry, I didn't realize it would be so emotional.
That's perfectly understandable.
But one of the things that really has been significant for me to be aware of is that now I've been watching my dreams for a long time. I'll get up and I'll tell myself to remember them, and I'll write them down. And I don't always do that every night, but when I do, I write them down, yada, yada. But sorry.
Well, while you're collecting yourself, I'll just interject that these experiences can be so emotional because they touch possibly one of the deepest questions and sources of meaning in our lives. And that is the question of whether, when our loved ones pass, are they lost? Are we disconnected from them? And to have an experience of connection, it just touches one of our deepest sources of meaning and importance in life. So yeah, completely understandable. Yeah.
Something that's shown up for me, this has happened like at least twice, no, 3 times. Several different people have come to me and presented themselves. And what I find that's unique about it is my comfort level. I don't realize I'm dreaming until sort of there comes a place where I'm not, I'm not awake. But there's a real comfortableness. I'm having a conversation, and these are people, in our best moments. It's like in our best moments, and I'm just speaking as naturally as, anything, because quite frankly, I know I have the ability for the psychic stuff, but since I was a little, I'm afraid of it. It scares me, and I just say, don't scare me. But I know I've got to come into it, and I feel like they're telling me, okay, we're going to take you in this easier way, by doing it through the dream. And I really do. I sense them. I feel them. They present themselves in ways that are significantly beautiful, manifested. My eldest daughter died at 39. She lost her hair. She had thinning hair for years. And she always comes to me with a beautiful head of hair.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Yes, yes, ecstatic. My stepmom did the same thing the other morning. And the interesting thing about that one, and I'll share and then I'll be still, but I was roaming around the apartment here and talking to them like the day before, and saying like, why did things turn out that way? Why did you really have that? Well, I asked my dad, why did you have those particular addictions? Okay, just what in the world was with this? Now, this is something I've known. I'm over 60, I've known of this all my life. But I asked him specifically. And when I went to sleep, my stepmom appeared, very beautiful, used wonderful presentation. It's a feeling, it's an aura, it's a sense of who they are that you get, and you just know it's them. And I don't see their features, so that I think that would frighten me, if I saw their features per se. But I see their persona and their presence, and it's just, it's what they want to share with me. And then there was this little kid, and this little kid, and it took me a couple of days to figure this out, but this little kid manifested for me, okay, in this dreamlike state, if you will, these two addictions. Well, it took me a couple of days to figure out what in the world was being presented and what was being said here. I recognized my stepmom. I think I needed her in the background to manifest her presence strongly for me to reflect on who this other person was, because what I believe, what I sense in this is that it was my father presenting himself to me to say these were addictions that I received by the time I was 3 or 4 years old. And they weren't something I could, it was just something that was a part of his makeup that early. Because this kid, the energy of this kid, it was a very, it was an adult personality in a little child's body. And then these addictions manifested, and I felt the little child so strongly in this caricature. But I just can't tell you the extent of healing that manifestation gave to me, is giving to me, to tell you the truth, because it's kind of thing, it doesn't just evaporate. I think that's what makes it different too. You see, the dream kind of evaporates, doesn't it?
Right. That's
but
right.
These kinds of things that I feel are that which crosses between the two worlds, if you will use that term, it stays with you.
Yeah.
It stays with you, and I've used this analogy for a long time. It's like intravenous feeding. It's like having those water bottles they give you, the thing in the hospital, and to nurture you. It's like being fed like that through the spirit. It's like an extra. You talked about the Holy Spirit. Now I'm really into that mentality, okay? And to me, that's what it's like. It's like being fed that way. So anyway, I won't take up any more time. But
thank you very much. And there's so much to say about what you've shared. But one thing I will say is that I didn't say is in the presentation is that most often when the disembodied appear, they don't necessarily appear with clear features, but that sense of who they are. It's like their identity imprint is what appears, and it's unmistakable that that's who they are. But when they appear physically, they often appear in the prime of life, that no matter what circumstances they died under, they appear whole and healthy and vital. And it's that in itself is very healing, to know that they're not forever in the state that you last saw them in physical existence. And so that in itself is helpful. But then so many other aspects, like you said, of in this one aspect, getting a sense of understanding about the source of addictions and how out of control he was of that, because it had its roots so early in his life, probably from trauma or something. You know, you may or may not know about that.
In I'm one of the few individuals, humans, that I've ever spoken to or been aware of in the family that recognize the good, the wonderfully good components that were hidden, if you will, behind the addictions and the whatevers. And just to be, I would actually rather have learned about this way, or be taught about this way, than to have him stand before me and tell me. Because I get better understanding, because I, again, using that term we use, the Holy Spirit, I think there's a communication factor that's bigger, if that makes sense.
Yes, it transcends normal human communication, because you're getting the holistic knowledge, the knowing, what it is sometimes called noesis, this holistic knowing that is much more than human intellect or human communication can grasp.
Exactly.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Debbie. You bet.
Thanks, Jan, as well, for again, thank you for jumping in and helping out, and of course thank you, Ramses, as well, for sharing your experience as well. So I think we've reached the end, unless anybody else has anything last minute they'd like to share. We are 33 minutes over the allotted end time. Albert, over to you.
Yeah, I had these sort of experiences all my life. And to go back to where you were saying that people show up in the prime of their life, I had seen as a kid my great-grandmother and interacted with her, and she's exactly the way I'd seen her in the pictures probably in the last few years of her life. And one of the more interesting experiences I had was recently, about a year ago. A good friend of mine from college had died of a heart attack. And I had just spoken with his wife on the phone and got the information. And about an hour later, I was on Facebook on her page trying to scroll through it. And the thing wanted to auto scroll. I had the foresight to think that, oh, this is him. This is him. And I let it go, and it went berserk, and then ended up on one picture of their backyard deck. I had no idea what the meaning of it was, but that's apparently what he wanted me to see.
Interesting. Wow. So it was kind of an electronic one, because it involved your computer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you talk with anybody who knows anything about their backyard deck to try to decipher?
Well, I asked his wife about it, and she says she painted it, but that was about as far as I got.
Okay.
So I don't really know what it was. It was just something, I think he just wanted to show me the picture. He might have constructed or done something like that.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you.